The last couple of slides from the lecture showcase examples of what I am asking you guys to do in this simplified geometric shape reconstruction of an old masterwork. So here we've got a Picasso, an early work before he went quite abstract. And then we have a sort of an amalgam of shapes and planes that are ultimately about the simplification of not only the forms, but the composition as well. Ken Cooley is a really good artist to look at for this exercise. He has an entire series of works where he's basing his, essentially his collages off of old masterworks. We've got Matisse on the left and a Renoir on the right. And then I've got the final collages and then the original works to compare if we go back and forth. And then just a few last examples here. Jan de Heem, a 17th century Dutch still life, and then a simplification of that. I have a list of artists here. You can take a screenshot of that. Those are some just suggestions, but as long as you're using somebody from art history who keeps composition as the sort of primary focus, that would be ideal. So just if you're worried or questioning whether or not an artist is appropriate, just ask me. So if we've got our Photoshop open, I've actually taken an image. It's a high-res image. It doesn't necessarily have to be a high-res image. And what I've done is I've pulled it off of Google Image Search. So I'm going to open that up, and I can simply drag and drop it. If I move my screen over, I need to make this a little bit smaller so you all can see. What I'm going to have is, excuse me, what I'm going to have on my left here, let's take up the whole screen, is my tools. And we're just going to use a few tools today, but the first thing I'm going to want you to do is to double click on that very first move tool. And we're going to the artboard. And what we're going to do in the artboard is we're going to select that whole area and then press that plus sign. And what that'll do is that'll allow us to keep those two screens up at once. So I'm keeping an artboard that's white, and then I'm keeping the original reference right next to it. And what I'm going to do is selecting that artboard, and you'll notice over here, down below, what you're going to see is you're going to see what we call layers. And under those layers, that's basically the sort of elements and veils that we produce one over the other. And so what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to actually work from the back up. And so in recreating this using only geometric shapes, I'm going to use a few tools. I'm going to use the Move tool. I'm going to use the Polygonal Lasso tool. And if I double click on that, you'll see that there are a couple. So if that one's not selected, that's the one you want. This one right here. And then I've got in here the eyedropper tool. And you'll see that there's a bunch, but for this purpose, we're only going to use the simple eyedropper tool here. And when I select and use the eyedropper tool, what I'm doing is I'm ultimately selecting a color. And when I click on that little square right there, that's my palette. And so those are the primary tools I'll be using for this. And then the paintbrush tool here. And you'll notice if you double click on that paintbrush tool, you'll have a couple things that come up. You'll have a brush tool, pencil tool, color replacement tool, and a mixer brush tool. And for the purposes of simplification, we'll be using just the brush tool today. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I can use a couple of things. I can select a rectangle if I want to. I can draw a rectangle using that very second tool there. I can make an ellipse with it. I can make a marquee going either direction. But for this purpose, I think the easiest thing to do is to just go with a polygonal lasso tool. And when I say I'm moving from the back up, what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, the vast majority of this is yellow. And so what I'm going to do is select the whole thing. And then I'm going to paint it. But if I actually go to my palette, that's not that color. So I use my eyedropper tool over here. I'm going to find the general color, or what we call the local color. I'm going to click on that and make sure that that's selected, and you'll notice it shows up on my palette. And then I'm going to paint it. And Oh, I need to select the right artboard. Wrong one. And I'm going to start painting. The first thing that I need to do is I need to flatten the image though. So I'll go to Layer, flatten the image, and then I'll be able to alter this. And so I'm just going to paint that with my paint tool. All right, going back to my marquee tool, I'm keeping both of these up. I can make it a little bit smaller as well. What I can do is I can start actually drawing out the shapes. And I'm not going to really worry about going beyond those. But I'm going to start selecting the shapes sort of approximately. And I make sure I close that in by a little double click. So I'm drawing out that geometric shape. I'm not worrying too much. And I need to figure out that color, and that's pretty black, but I am going to use my dropper tool. And I'm not going to worry about all the detail in there at all. Not yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply paint that black. I'll do the same thing with the hair. I'll deselect it though. Deselecting, you'll notice there's a shortcut here, which is basically just Command D, so I can use that on my keyboard, or I can just simply go to the top here. And I'll start with my hair. And like I said, I'm not going to worry about the detail yet. I'm just drawing those simple shapes. It doesn't really matter if this goes beyond that. And then I'll paint her in as well. Paint, 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 paint. And the next shape I'll deal with, which is going to be the largest shape, remember I said I talked about wanting to paint from the back to the front, is I'm going to do this little hat. And it's okay that I don't get the exact shape because I can always work on top of what I've missed. And you notice I'm not messing with my layers at all. I'm going to make this a big shape and then I'm going to alter it later. We've got what looks to be maybe hair bangs here. I'm going to close that shape in. And when I know that shape is closed in, you'll see this little selection. Okay, it means that whole area is selected and it's only that area. I'm going to go back to my dropper tool. I'm going to find that red. Make sure it's selected as red. And then I'm going to paint it. It's as simple as that. Deselect. And then I'm going to start possibly drawing in some bigger shapes like the white here. And this is a Picasso image that is known as the Weeping Woman. So I'm just going to continue to simplify that shape, and I will just dwindle down into a little bit more detail as I go. Oh, I missed a little bit here, so go back. Go a little circle. Closing that shape out. And I'm not going to think it's white. I'm going to make sure it's white. Looks pretty darn white. And then I'm going to paint it. Paint, 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 paint. Okay. Deselect. And then it's at this point I need to start actually thinking about the other smaller shapes. I've got this sort of neutral red, this sort of browny color here that I'm going to put in. And just remember I can crop all this out at the end. And like I said, I'm working from the back to the front. So I'll go to my eyedropper tool, find that brown. And remember there's a couple of, that's a painting, right? So there's going to be some colors in there. When in doubt, go the in-between, okay? And I think that right there is kind of the in-between. And then I'll paint it. Do the same thing on the other side, where I see it on the other side. Regarding the line here, and I'll just do that and finish up the demo at that point. Paint that. Deselect. If I want to do a line, the easiest way to do that would actually be to paint it, but the reality is my hand is going to fail me. And so what I'm going to do, and I think the line is actually fairly important to the success of this work, so I'm actually going to draw the lines. and they're going to be fairly small. I can zoom in order to do them. And I can zoom in a couple ways. This is the zoom tool, or I can just simply use my, my trackpad. And then I'm going to paint that black after I use the dropper tool, that same black of that line, and then I'll paint it. Deselect, and I'll move on to the next thing. The line is the thing I think I would do at the end, though, to be perfectly honest, before I actually got the major shapes in. And the major shapes I would be talking about would be like this brown shape here, the red. I would make all of this red, and then I would fill that in with another black. What I wouldn't worry about are these little detail elements. I might do a couple of elements here in the hair in order to add some visual interest, but remember, this is not a direct facsimile. It is primarily a compositional study that's fairly simplified. How far you take that simplification, though, and how elaborate you go in that is up to you. At the point in which you are done, what I would do is I don't really like this stuff coming out here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take that marquee tool, that rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to select that area on the side there, creating a straight rectangle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it. And you'll notice there's two palettes here, and the other one that's selected is white. And so I just press that little arrow, I reverse it, and then I just paint that white. I deselect it, and when I've got it perfect, and let's imagine that it's perfect there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop it. Once I've completed all of this and I'm ready and I feel confident that it is exactly what I want it to be, and I'm ready to present the final product, I'm going to go to the crop tool, and then I can draw the crop, okay, right around my image. And I really want a border, so I can make this a little bit larger. Deselect. And I feel pretty good about that. When I'm ready and I've completely finished my image, I will save it not only as a Photoshop document, like that, and you can save it, you can name it, Weeping Woman Copy, and I can save that onto my desktop, or, and I'll go to File, Save As, and save a separate file as simply a JPEG. Not a JPEG 2000, not a stereo, a JPEG. And I'll call that Weeping Woman Copy, and you'll notice that file actually changes at the end there. I'll save that onto my large format folder. And that is it. I do think, though, I probably want to, I'm going to flatten this image one more time. No, we don't need to. I'm going to open up a new image, go to an 8.5 by 11, pop her on there, just drag and drop it. I go to my move tool, drag and drop it. And I use the option tool in order to bring those handlebars up, move her over, and try to keep a pretty even border around. And then I'll save that as probably the final image because I like the bleed area there. I like the border. I want to clean that up. I'm going to do that before I finish. Use my single marquee tool, paint it white, and it's cleaned up. Deselect it, File, Save As, JPEG. And that is that. And then it's ready for print if I want to print it. That is my demo. Thank you so much.